Okay, hello everybody. Today we're going to be getting into our very first lesson of our very first unit. So we're focusing on the colonies of England, 13 colonies, and this is kind of the beginning. We've talked about so far in class Native Americans and different kinds of colonization brought over to the Americas by many European countries. But for but for this year, we really are going to focus on the English colonies, which kind of lead into the Revolution and the beginning of our country. It all kind of begins right here. Okay, so for every lesson we do, there's going to be an essential question that centers around an idea we're focusing on for the lesson. All right. So this essential question says this: there are many reasons for success and failures all throughout history. Why did the colonies at Roanoke Island, Virginia fail? Why was Jamestown able to succeed? Identify two conditions and circumstances in each attempt at colonization which aided in the failures and successes of the first English colonies in North America. All right, so those are the ideas we're focusing on. Okay, the ideas of success and failures, and that with every success, you'll find failures that superseded it, that came before it. Okay, so here are some of the key terms and important people, the vocab terms for the week. We have Sir Walter Raleigh, who was an English explorer, privateer, established the Virginia colony. It failed twice. We have joint stock companies. These are companies that are backed by investors who put money into a project to earn money. A charter colony is established by a group of settlers who have been given a formal document allowing them to settle in any particular area. Jamestown is the first permanent English settlement. John Smith, soldier adventurer, took control of Jamestown colony. John Rolfe introduced Spanish tobacco to Jamestown as a cash crop. A cash crop is a crop raised on large farms to create revenue. Indentured servants, a man or woman who sold their labor for a trip to the colony. The headright system, the London Company gave their colonists 50 acres each, 50 acres of land each for settling in North America. House of Burgesses, a group of elected colonial representatives from Virginia who helped provide more support. And then we have Bacon's Rebellion. Western colonists wanted more land, and they're willing to fight for it. Okay, so these are some of our key terms that we're going to be going over, the important people and vocabulary for the lesson. All right. All right. So why settle in the Americas? What is up with the North and South American continents? Okay, there are several reasons why England wanted to settle in North America. Okay? Protestant England and Catholic Spain are at war. They're constantly at war with each other. Spain wants to restore England to a Catholic nation. Queen Elizabeth I of England is looking to disrupt Spanish shipping and gain more revenue from North America, like Spain and Portugal have been doing in South America. So Spain doesn't like England because they're Protestant. England doesn't like Spain because they're Catholic, and because Spain's making a ton of money and a huge revenue stream coming from South America. Between just resources coming out of there, there's gold coming out of South America. So England kind of has a little jealous bone going about the South American trade with the Spanish. Okay. Queen Elizabeth would also like to begin a permanent English settlement in North America to help with this revenue stream. So she wants to make money as well, the same way that the Spanish are making money coming out of South America. The location of North America is not ideal for English ships to sail to. The winds and ocean currents don't provide a direct route to the area. You can take weeks, sometimes months, to get from England to North America. However, the benefit of settling the area is worth it. So if you look at the map over here on the right-hand side, here is England up here in the corner. Here's North America. The way that the wind and the ocean currents move, they don't move directly across the ocean. You can't really go in a straight line, right? Not yet, anyway. Right now, you have to follow the currents. So the current circles way south and comes along the Caribbean islands, which they call the West Indies, and they bring them up here close to Florida and then over here to where North America is. So it's one big circle all the way around. Okay, otherwise you're fighting the wind and you're going to take months to get there. So the currents are the faster route at this point. So the benefits are definitely worth it. The coastline is within 100 miles of Spanish shipping lanes from South America to Europe. So all the Spanish ships that come out of South America here and the West Indies here, you got to travel past this line to get back to Europe. So this coastline right here, which is where the English want to settle, is right on the way past the Spanish shipping lines. Okay. So this makes it a prime spot to raid Spanish ships carrying gold and silver from South America. Okay, it makes it easy for them. Many believe there was an all-water route through the continent to the Pacific Ocean, which gains access to the Asian trade. That's not true, but they don't know that yet. Okay, there is no direct water route between the coastlines of North America, but a lot of people believe there is one there, and they're constantly looking for it. Also, Englishmen were looking for freedom from religious persecution and seeking new settlements abroad. This would lead to a future mass migration of English to North America. Right. So bring on Sir Walter Raleigh. Walter Raleigh was a soldier, statesman, an adventurer, and a close friend to Queen Elizabeth I. The Queen wanted Raleigh to investigate the new continent as a possible location for colonization. So in April of 1584, two ships set sail for North America on a reconnaissance mission for Raleigh. On July 4th, 1584, the ship sighted lands what was the present day Outer Banks. There's a little bit of foreshadowing there. July 4th intent. One of the men aboard the ships was John White, an artist whose job it was to create maps of the area and pictorial records of the flora and fauna. That's plants and animals. One of the first things the explorers noticed was the abundance of vegetation, the animal life, and the waters teeming with fish. It was a very lively, vibrant place. The explorers also came in contact with local natives who they believed to be naive, quaint, and savage. Okay, so they technologically and intellectually not as advanced as the English settlers. One of these natives was a Croatoan named Monteo, who would help to communicate between the English and the Croatoan. Monteo was welcomed back to England with Raleigh's explorers and audience with the Queen. She gave him the title of Lord of Roanoke and was made governor of all local tribes. Question: how and why is the Queen of England able to do this? We'll discuss that in class. Believing the lands to be bountiful for crops, the water filled with fish, and the air stocked with birds, the Queen had enough to go on to attempt colonization. The biggest interest was in geographic location, close enough to raid the Spanish ships and far enough to prevent Spanish attacks. Okay, so the Queen sees lots of fertile soil, lots of vegetation, lots of animals, different tribesmen, different Native American tribes who aren't as they believe intellectually advanced and technologically advanced as they are. They believe they have the advantage. Okay, now to go on an adventure like this costs a lot of money, and Sir Walter Raleigh needs the money to set up his colony. So setting up a colony costs a lot of money, so Raleigh needed investors. Most investors in England only had an interest in quick returns on their investment and did not see the value of a long-term investment, especially in unpredictable North America. Because remember, this is the first attempt to do this. Many English merchants were happy with peaceful trade with the Spanish. Others were after all-out war with Spain. This forced Raleigh to finance the colony using mostly his own money. This first attempt was strictly a military venture to set up fortifications and disrupt the Spanish shipping of fish and whale oils off the Newfoundland, Canada coast. Okay, so that's the main reason. Set up fortification, establish yourself there, and do some pirating while you're there as well. One supporter of Raleigh's, his name was Richard Hakluyt, a geographer, saw the potential in the colony. He wrote that America can create as many raw goods as Africa, Europe, and Asia combined. Yeah, that's how much he believed in North America. It will create industrial growth for the idle men of England's overpopulated cities. With the ease of short trip, it will create future markets for manufacturing and taxable goods. So essentially what he's saying is there's a lot of people in England who are unemployed looking for work, and North America has enough natural resources to provide those occupations for those people. Plus, the idea of taxing said goods also raises money for England. Hakluyt's book, Discourse of Western Planting, got the ball rolling, and on April 9th, 1585, 600 men aboard 5 ships sailed for North America. Then, on June 26th, 1585, 4 of the 5 ships finished the journey, losing 1 ship and all of her men to a storm off the coast of Portugal, and arrived in what was present-day North Carolina. At the time, the land was named Virginia, named for Queen Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen. She never got married. The settlers didn't know how to survive in the new land, so they depended on natives for food and supplies. The colonists were treated well by the local tribe, allowed to set up fortifications near on northern Roanoke Island, and feasting together. However, after a silver cup came up missing, the Englishmen blamed the natives for thievery. It's very important to understand the native concept of gift giving, exchanging goods for favors. So the Native Americans are providing a favor for the Englishmen who don't know how to survive. Okay? The English don't understand this concept. It's different to them. They are on two different levels. So the English didn't know or understand the idea and burned their crops in the village to teach the natives a lesson. Now, if you are the newcomers to the land and the only people you are counting on to survive, you just burn down their homes and crops, probably wasn't the best idea. This event would have a long term consequence for the colonists' future survival. In the end, greed and overconfidence would be the downfall of these English settlers. All right, you basically have two different cultures, and both sides were not on the same page as far as being understanding of each other, mostly on the English side. The English dependency on native food and supplies burdened the Native Americans greatly and made the English unwelcome guests. This is partially because the English didn't understand the gift giving concept. When gifts were exchanged between native tribes, this made a strong alliance between them. The English would trade with any and all tribes they saw fit, which would lead to a violent confrontation between the two races. So essentially, when you have one tribe you're trading with, to the natives, you are just trading with that tribe, with them. When you go to a rival tribe and start trading with another tribal, another rival tribe, that is considered rude. Okay. Also, the two peoples valued different things. The English valued the ownership of land, and the natives, with their own complicated culture, didn't understand ownership. So they saw what the English valued as meaningless. In less than a year, the peaceful savages of English lore would turn into a vengeful army of 700 to 800 Native American warriors. So it was just a clash of cultures. Okay, they didn't understand each other, and the English weren't really willing to be accepting of the other culture. The Englishmen needed the natives' help, food, and resources, but there continued to be dependency and hostilities. You add the worst drought in the last 800 years on top of it all, the relationship between the two people was all but severed. The English, with no reinforcements to aid them, decided it was time to leave for England in the spring of 1586. Raleigh refused to give up his city of Raleigh in Virginia so easily. By the next summer, he had learned from his mistakes of the first voyage of mostly military personnel. With his next attempt, he would recruit craftsmen from the middle classes of London who had the skill sets to build and survive in the vast wilderness of the New World. Seek aid and funds from the English court, and John White was to be named their governor. The second colony would set sail from Plymouth on May 8th, 1587. So here we go. Walter Raleigh gives it another go. He's determined to get this right. And in order to get it right, he takes out the military aspect of the adventure and puts more craftsmen and artisans into the colony to help actually build a community. Kind of makes sense. Raleigh's second attempt at the Virginia colony sent 3 ships with a much more diverse group of people and their entire families, including John White's own daughter and son-in-law. The new settlers were supposed to end their journey at Chesapeake Bay, but were instead dropped off at the old Roanoke colony location, presumably because the captain of the expedition was eager to resume his privateering of Spanish ships. This was a problem because, one, the old fortifications were deserted of any survivors from the previous year, and two, some natives were still hostile towards the English from the previous year's encounters. But luckily for them, Manteo had returned with them and became an advocate for the new settlers. The old friendship was renewed between the Croatoan and the English, with little apprehension on the part of the Croatoan. A new problem arose in regards to settler supplies. Because the captain of the expedition was in such a hurry to get the settlers to Virginia, they never made a stop in the Caribbean to resupply the ships. So the settlers were running low on food and supplies, and the natives weren't willing to help too much because they had their own shortages. So John White was voluntold to go back to England for more supplies, more help and supplies. So when I say voluntold, I mean he didn't want to go, but the statesmen of the new colony all voted him as the one to leave because he was the governor. Governor John White left the settlement for England in late 1587 to get more supplies. A 2 to 3 month trip to England turned into 2 years as a Spanish threat to England forced all vessels to stay in England. Every attempt John White made to return to Virginia was met with hardships. White attempted 2 more trips in 1588, only to have the captains fail at privateering instead of actually going to Virginia. In March of 1589, Governor White finally set sail with the supplies. He didn't arrive to Virginia until August 15th, 6 months after setting sail from England. Once again, the privateers spent a lot of time hunting down Spanish treasure ships. When White finally reached the shores of Roanoke and the city of Raleigh, the second group of colonists had all disappeared without a trace. Signs of their location were found. The word Croatoan and letters CRO were carved in the fort in 2 different places. The houses were taken down and moved. Many of the possessions were found buried in the nearby sands. Many believe this was a sign that an enemy tribe had attacked the fort, or that the colonists ran out of food and left it as a message as to where they were going. Their nearby friends, the Croatoan tribe. John White never returned to Virginia, having tried 5 times, and the colonists were lost to history. White would blame the practices of privateering on his delayed return and the end of the colonists in Virginia. Okay, so this is one of those great mysteries of American lore and history, because there still are very little signs as to what happened, like actually happened to these people. There are archaeological digs and things like that where they're finding certain things that kind of lead to maybe they were here, maybe they were there, who knows? But nothing definitive, nothing for sure. So it's one of those fun things to think about, one of the mysteries of North America. Okay, this is a video about the Croatoan tribes, the Roanoke tribes, and the colonies. You can watch that on your own later on if you like. Now, I'm a big history guy, obviously. So these are pictures of me at one of the fortifications in North Carolina. So the fortification on Roanoke Island, North Carolina, one of the very first British settlements in North America. This is not the site of the lost colony. Park rangers explain that this is probably the site of one of the earlier fortifications of either the first or second voyage. So what it is those first fortifications, like the military fortifications that they had built, okay, not the actual what you call it, lost colony. All right. So either way, it was fun to go and see all that kind of stuff. Colonizing America again, or part 2, or however you want to say it. It would be almost 20 years before England attempted colonization in Virginia again. In 1606, there is a new monarch on the throne of England, and King James I granted charters, or a written contract, giving the holder the right to establish a colony in North America somewhere between the 34th and the 41st parallel. So if you look at this map, we're talking like about between this area right in here. Okay, notice where Jamestown is, right here next to the Chesapeake Bay. To prevent the previous mistakes of other colonial attempts, this charter was given to the Plymouth Company and the Virginia Company, joint stock companies, in which several investors put money into the colony called stocks, with the hope of gaining equal revenue in return. This helped cut the cost of a single person trying to colonize, like Raleigh did. Raleigh ended up going broke, returned to privateering later on, because he couldn't make any money off of the colonies. He basically bankrupted himself trying to start the Roanoke colony. In April of 1607, 144 English colonists of the Virginia Company arrived on the shores of modern-day Virginia. After an initial attack by a small band of natives, the colonists quickly built a fort in their newly created settlement of Jamestown, named for King James I. Jamestown will go on to become the first successful and permanent English settlement in North America. The Plymouth Company would attempt the colony at Sagadahoc, Maine, but it would fail due to harsh weather and Native Americans. Okay, so up here is the small coastline where Sagadahoc, Maine would be today. So anything you know about Sagadahoc or in Maine or anywhere in that area in the Northeast is extremely cold in the winter. Okay, it's one of those things where off the coast of Maine, the waters get really nasty, the winds pick up, waves hit, it gets super cold and snowy in the wintertime. And these English settlers had no idea how to survive in that kind of environment. So they didn't last too long. The Jamestown colonists quickly learned that tremendous challenges faced them if they were going to survive. They needed peaceful relations with the powerful Powhatan tribe to learn how to feed themselves. Settlers also needed to and establish an adequate shelter in a swampy environment which was prone to disease. The joint stock companies began to use propaganda to help raise funds in support of the new colonies. However, it wasn't until John Smith, a soldier, explorer, adventurer, arrived in Jamestown struggles subsided. In the first year, many of the colonists went looking for gold instead of working in settlement fortifications and farming the lands. Swampy areas with malaria-carrying mosquitoes were spreading diseases, and many colonists became sick from drinking poor river water. So it's a lot like the very first attempt at Roanoke. There was not actually a push to actually fortify and colonize anything. There was a different agenda. The first one at Roanoke was more military, and the first one in Jamestown, people thought they'd go and find gold and become rich real quick. It didn't happen because, well, there is no gold in Virginia. Later that year, John Smith arrived in Jamestown to instill more discipline into the colonists. He made peace with the Powhatans, who began helping the colonists with farming and initiated a system which forced the colonists to work on the settlements. Essentially, his theory was if you don't work, you're not going to eat. And he put armed guards in front of the store supplies, so the food was on guard at all times. Now, part of this story you can trace back to the Disney movie Pocahontas. Yeah, that's not real. Okay. In this instance, Disney is a liar because Pocahontas was 11 years old when John Smith was in Virginia, which means they didn't get married. Okay? But she was alive at the time, and she was a Powhatan, but she did not marry John Smith. In 1609, John Smith was injured in a munitions explosion and forced to leave for England to get medical attention. 800 new settlers also arrived that same year. The following winter became known as the Starving Time, as colonists lost the help of the Powhatans when John Smith left for England. They were forced to eat leather, mice, rats, and snakes. Only 66 of the colonists remained alive by the next spring. So you had 800, and now you're at 66. That's a huge loss. In 1610, the governor, Lord de la Warr, arrived and took control of Jamestown, imposing more discipline in the colony. In 1612, John Rolfe, an explorer, statesman, and businessman, arrived in Jamestown with the Spanish high-grade tobacco. The new plant took to the Virginia climate extremely well and became very popular in England. The success of the tobacco crop led Governor de la Warr to allow the colonists to control their own lands and grow tobacco. This ownership helped them to work harder for their own lands and earn profits. Jamestown had found the crop that would make the colony a success. So the thing about John Rolfe, and this is where Pocahontas Disney Movie Part 2 actually gets it right, because Pocahontas did marry John Rolfe. But going back to tobacco, so the Spanish tobacco was highly guarded by the Spanish government. It was very popular amongst the Spanish and some Europeans. So they didn't want their tobacco seeds to get out into the open market. Somehow John Rolfe got his hands on some, which was very dangerous because anybody found stealing or using Spanish tobacco that wasn't a Spaniard would, be executed. So John Rolfe got his hands on some, and he felt that Virginia would be the prime spot because of the hot, humid weather. And he was right. The Spanish tobacco took very well to the Virginia climate. And poof, there you go. Now we're a success. Okay. Of course, it doesn't happen overnight. It took a few years for them to really get this crop in order and get it moving and growing enough and selling enough and shipping enough to make a big enough profit to call it a success. But it's only a few years down the road from this point. The population of Jamestown in 1619 was 600. By 1621, 2 years later, the population rose to 2,000 plus. There are two reasons for this massive increase in population. The introduction of tobacco by John Rolfe in 1612 became a cash crop, which means people are growing it just to make money. Also, the headright system. The London Company gave their colonists their own lands, 50 acres each, for selling in North America just to grow tobacco. That's how popular it was. The only problem is that that whole land ownership ordeal with the Native Americans, the whole concept of there is no land ownership versus there is land ownership, that becomes a huge issue. As the popularity of Jamestown increased, more and more people wanted to get there, but they're not all could afford it. Indentured servants were people looking for a way to get to the colonies but could not pay for it. They sold themselves into labor for a trip to America and worked someone's land until their debt was paid off. So indentured servitude is not slavery. All right, it's voluntary servitude. So essentially, a person or a company will pay the family's way across the ocean, but the family has to work the company's land for a given number of years before they have earned the right to be free of that servitude. Okay, so it's voluntary servitude, not slavery. As more and more colonists kept arriving in Jamestown, there was a higher demand for farmable lands to grow tobacco. The only lands in the area were used by local native tribes, namely the Powhatans. Jamestown colonists kept taking over native lands for tobacco farming, so the Powhatan began fighting back. In order to stem the fighting between native and colonists and create a lasting peace, in 1614, John Rolfe married Pocahontas, a Powhatan princess who converted to Christianity. Natives and colonists established trade with each other again. In 1616, Pocahontas, now named Rebecca, would become an ambassador for her native people in London when Rolfe would take his new wife to England to help raise funds for the Virginia Company and to the court of the English king. Pocahontas died on her return voyage to Jamestown, more than likely from a European disease she was not immune to. The peace between Jamestown and the Powhatan did not last for too long. In 1622, the Powhatans killed hundreds of colonists who kept attempting to claim more lands for tobacco farms. This confrontation would continue for more than a century. So the whole idea of peace between Native Americans, the marriage between Pocahontas and John Rolfe was all good. It was fine. It was a great idea, and it lasted, but it was never going to last forever. Not because she died a couple of years later. That's besides the point. It has to do with culture. Okay, the culture of Native Americans and the culture of the English, they just didn't mix. They were too different for them to ever really get along. All right, so the success of Jamestown required the need of more local control to keep the town organized and lawful. In 1619, the colonists created a House of Burgesses, a group of elected colonial representatives to help provide more local control. It became the first representative assembly in American colonies. It would keep the colony governed peacefully for the next 50 years. The lands in Virginia were primarily owned by large landowners, called plantations, which means there was no other land for sale or to acquire. By 1670, 1/4 of all free white men were former indentured servants with no land. Nathaniel Bacon is one of them. He's one of these former indentured servants and demanded the governor, William Berkeley, to fight for more land along the western frontier for tobacco farms, but Berkeley refused to do it. This led to Bacon's rebellion in 1676. Bacon and his followers marched into Jamestown, took control of the House of Burgesses, and burned Jamestown to the ground. Bacon died of an illness shortly after that, which ends the rebellion. The governor hung 23 of Bacon's followers. King Charles II recalled the governor for being unable to control the colony. Due to this uprising, planters began looking at alternate means of labor, which led to the beginning of race-based slavery. Okay, so what we have here is a situation where there's a labor dispute. You've got a bunch of freed indentured servants who are looking for jobs, and essentially that job is farming. All right, it is a rural community, obviously. Big farms, plantations, tobacco plants. That's kind of what's promised when you go over there as an indentured servant. But there's just no land to be had, and the governor, and you can't fault him for it, didn't want to go to war with Native Americans over more land. So the former indentured servants like Bacon rebelled against the governor, and there you have Bacon's rebellion. Okay, the first civil war, I guess, in the North American colony. All right, so that is that for this lesson. Okay, talking about the beginnings of our country, going back in time. There's a handsome guy. Back to our essential question. Okay, why do the colonies of Roanoke Island and Virginia fail? There are several reasons why. Was Jamestown able to be successful? Okay, you're identifying two conditions and circumstances in each attempt at colonization. Okay, failures and successes. Okay? It's a pivotal part of everyone's life. You're going to fail before you're going to succeed, right? I doubt LeBron James hit his first jump shot. Maybe he did. I doubt it. Okay, so just like LeBron James and his jump shot, the first colonies in North America were not successful. It took time, effort, and learning from mistakes in order to do that. Okay, if you have questions about this lesson, you can go ahead and message me on Schoology, and I'll be happy to answer them for you. If not, I hope you learned something and you enjoyed the lesson.